Well, imagine this, 100 years ago today, at this very moment, one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history was underway. The deadliest tornado in our nation's history. Jade takes us through nearly 4 terrifying hours across 3 different states.
The tri-state tornado of 1925 first hit the ground in southeastern Missouri, swept across southern Illinois before finally lifting back into the clouds in Indiana. It tore up a 219-mile path, moving on average 60 to 65 miles an hour, an exceptionally high speed. Along the way, 695 people were killed, 234 of those just in one city, Murfreesboro, Illinois. More than 2,000 people were injured, up to 15,000 homes destroyed. Again, this was 100 years ago. There are no pictures of the actual tornado, just devastation. But a lot has changed since then. The science of meteorology allows us to better understand how tornadoes develop. Technology has brought us satellite and radar, and eventually forecast models that alert us of the possibilities days in advance. There was no tornado forecast that day, and there was no immediate warning. There has been discussion whether this was actually one tornado. This was brought up at a recent conference in Murfreesboro, marking the 100-year anniversary. When you map out the damage reports, you see one continuous line with a few small gaps. After a reanalysis of the storm, researchers say they cannot conclusively determine those gaps were real. So it stands at one tornado. In the studio, Jade Steffens, First Alert 6.
Wow, Jade, thank you. So thankful for all the life-saving measures that we have made over the last 100 years. There are so many more stories to be told about that tragedy, among them one from a member of the First Alert 6 team whose grandfather grabbed 2 of his sons. The 3 of them were pulled into the air, and his grandfather, an aerial view of his farm. Sadly, his boys were pulled away from him and they did not survive. Grandpa did, however, but again, they had no warning. Still ahead on